Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Managing Editor Dave Noyce. I oversee the Salt Lake Tribune's faith coverage. I'm joined by Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack and Deputy Enterprise Editor Sean P. Means. Hi, Peggy and Sean. Welcome.
Hello.
Fun to be on this side of it.
Thank you. So before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com where you can access all of the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, please follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's show. Two female missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints enter the house of a Mr. Reed, apparently a welcoming seeker with, it turns out, his own marked up copy of the Book of Mormon, the faith's foundational scripture. Could this be a heaven-sent, quote, golden contact, eager to embrace the Latter-day Saint gospel? Hardly. The young proselytizers have instead begun a hellish descent into the dungeonous world of a brilliant but demented psychopath determined to test their religion and all religions in a terrorizing contest between belief and disbelief. Therein lies the heart of Heretic, the new psychological thriller starring Hugh Grant, and due out in theaters nationwide this week. The film already has earned praise from some reviewers, drawn criticism from the church, and spurred flashbacks to real-life frightening moments among former missionaries. On this week's show, we're going to discuss the merits and demerits of Heretic as both a movie with longtime film critic Sean Means, and as an argument for and against religion with our award-winning faith reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Be advised, listeners, that while we intend to keep spoilers to a minimum, there may be some elements we reveal from the film that you would rather not hear. So if you plan to see Heretic, you may want to view the movie first and then listen to our podcast. With that in mind, let's get started. So a question first for both of you, Peggy and Sean. A, did you like the movie? And then offer a brief reason why you liked it. Peggy, I'll start with you.
I am not a fan of horror or thrillers. So in that way, no, I did not like the violence of it. That said, there were, as a religion reporter, there were enough intriguing debates, discussions, actions that gave me something to think about. And so I did like that element, but ew, the violence, no.
Sean?
I really liked how the movie worked both as an intellectual exercise, getting into this debate conversation about religion, and also as a good thriller. I mean, it definitely has you on the edge of your seat. It definitely has you, concerned for these two young women as they're going through this harrowing ordeal. I thought it was very tightly constructed. Certainly well performed. Not just, Hugh Grant is amazing, and we'll get into that more, but also the two young actors, Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, give as good as they get from him, acting in terms of acting. I think it really works, frankly, as a thriller, and as a smarter than usual thriller. It's not just about jump scares. It's not just about the gore, which is, yeah, there is some, but I mean, in the pantheon of horror movies, that's pretty light. There's only. I mean, you want to say there's a minimum amount of blood in this compared to some things you see.
Well, as I said, I'm not a fan of the genre, so I wouldn't know that.
We're definitely working on different scales here, yes. But I did like it quite a lot.
So, Peggy, did the portrayals of the missionaries ring true? What did the filmmakers, in your view, get right? What maybe seemed a little off in their portrayal of Latter-day Saint missionaries?
Well, I would say they got the vast majority of it right. Those sister missionaries were very recognizable. Their clothing, their skirts that they wore so they could ride bikes, their offhanded conversations while they're walking, all the cadence, their zealousness, their eagerness, all of it just seemed very true to form. I felt like they did not step out of that character really at all through the whole show. Possibly one little conversation where one of the sisters cites a prayer study. I was like, really? sister, would you really do that? Or would you more talk personally about prayer or something like that?
And
that struck me as a little off. And maybe the other thing was at the beginning, they were talking about porn. As we know, missionaries have a lot of downtime and they do chat about irrelevant things, but that seemed a little maybe off. But their accents, their vocabulary, their cadence, all of it seemed right.
Yeah, outside of that initial conversation, and it's at the start, was sort of an off-color conversation, I guess you could
porn.
say.
Yeah.
But the demeanor also seemed true, Sean, did you have any feelings on that? I mean,
I was struck with how, I guess authentic would be the word for it, that it did feel like two young women who were in the situation. And I mean, I interviewed the actors and I interviewed the filmmakers. I interviewed the two young women, and both of them, interestingly enough, grew up in the Latter-day Saint faith.
The two female missionaries.
The actors who played the missionaries, they grew up in the church. They are no longer practicing, but they have friends and in-laws, friends and family members who are still involved. So they were, you could tell it was very close to them, to tell that they were getting what seemed to be those little details right.
Mm-hmm. So you talked to the filmmakers. Why did they decide to make the movie? What was their goal? What were they trying to do?
Scott Beck and Brian Woods, they've been making movies since they were kids growing up in Iowa. And they're best known for writing the script for the movie A Quiet Place.
The first one? The
first one. And for one thing, they wanted a movie where people actually were able to talk, because in A Quiet Place, there's very little dialogue at all in that movie. And they wanted to sort of do the opposite of that. And they had long wanted to talk something about religion, do something that dealt with the ideas of religion and how someone lives their faith and how someone talks about their faith in comparison to how they live it. They hit upon talking about the Latter-day Saints because the first movie they made some years ago called Nightlight, which is sort of a Blair Witchy kind of thriller with college students and nobody you've ever recognized is in it. They filmed it here in Utah and in the Salt Lake area, out in the woods mostly. And working here as a couple of independent filmmakers, they met a lot of other people in the film community here in Utah, a lot of them who are Latter-day Saints, and in Iowa, they'd never met Latter-day Saints before. And so they got talking and got very interested and thought, okay, if we ever do this religion movie we're talking about, this is one avenue we would want to probably try to explore. And they also recognize that, there are a lot of religions that have missionaries or have people who proselytize, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Baptists, what have you. But that as far as in the sort of familiarity in the pop culture, the Latter-day Saint missionaries are the ones everybody kind of recognizes or sees around.
Mm-hmm.
So
as opposed to Jehovah's Witnesses, where they're sort of part-time missionaries. In other words, they're congregants that go door to door, whereas these are full-time missionaries for 18 months, 2 years, whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm. And as we've seen, there's something in the pop culture in the last few years about missionaries and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in general. Mm-hmm. So it's something that is on people's radar.
Yeah, you have a fascinating story that went up this week about your interviews with the filmmakers and missionaries. Tell a little bit more about the female leads who play the missionaries. Okay. You get a little bit about their background.
Right.
And what did they think of their roles as they...
Well, Sophie Thatcher, people recognize from the series Yellow Jackets. She plays the young version of Juliette Lewis. Chloe East had a big splash in The Fabelmans. She played the Christian girlfriend,
another of the Christian role, right?
Yeah, another Christian role. And they talk about how they talked a lot about how Chloe East talked about how when she auditioned for it, she thought, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this movie because all she had was like one scene to audition. And she thought, it's going to be another one of these movies that mocks Latter-day Saints. And I have friends and family who are in the church and I wouldn't be able to do that to them. And then as she got into it, as she went through the audition process and saw the entire script, she learned, okay, this is deeper and more than what you usually get in a movie in a script that talks about the missionaries and the Latter-day Saints. And so she was like, okay, they get it. Whoever was in, whoever wrote this or whoever they consulted, they knew. There were little details like I think it was like a phone call to their ward leader or something like that, and they're like, oh, okay, they know the words, they know the lingo of the ins and outs of missionary work. So that was reassuring to Chloe, at least, that they can make this happen. And Sophie said very similarly, she has family and friends who are still involved in the church, and that they wanted to sort of do right by them, that they didn't want something that mocked the faith, but it actually explored the notion of religion and explored big ideas. And that's the other thing that actors love. If they can find a script that actually is about something that's not just, we're going to run in the dark in the woods for a while and then, scream a lot, that's not as interesting as a movie like this that actually gets into ideas and thoughts and and has something to say and has something that opens up the possibility that, when you see the movie, when you go, when the lights come back up, you have questions that aren't just, where are we going to go get to eat?
Yeah, they served blueberry pie after the screening I went to, which I did not.
Can I say something about that? I do think that it was kind of brilliant to choose LDS missionaries because, they, in addition to them being more well-known than these other types, they do go in strangers' houses typically, and they do have a quote message. It just, I don't think it would have been as compelling a story if it had been other types of missionaries. I think that it was pretty brilliant in that way, I think.
It's like if you even took the name tags off, most viewers would think Mormon missionaries.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've seen movies in the past where they basically create their own religion. They create some generic missionary that isn't quite Latter-day Saint, it isn't quite Baptist or something, but it's just sort of a generic. And we may fill in the gaps because we have seen culturally. You see
certainly in Utah.
Well, certainly in Utah, but elsewhere too. Where if they're wearing the white shirts with the short sleeves and the ties. That, I mean, even, the Snoop Dogg album that's coming out, with the video came out last week. They weren't wearing name tags, but you got the idea. That's what they were going for, but it was it was more generic than this was.
I actually thought from the trailer, I wasn't sure whether it was going to be, I thought maybe
the first trailer.
I thought, maybe it is a generic thing, but then, oh my goodness, no, absolutely. The church.
In the first trailers, they cut off. They said, Church of Jesus Christ, and then they cut off the second half of that. And that may be just for the fact that you only have 120 seconds in a trailer, and saying that full title, it is time wasted.
And that's one of the church's preferred references anyway for second reference to the church. So, we've talked a little bit about the violence, but I think we should know that, and Peggy, I'll start with you, that the church has criticized the movie for its graphic depictions of especially violence against women. Is that a fair criticism? There is violence against women. That's certainly true.
There definitely is violence against women. And of course, they probably chose sister missionaries because they would be maybe physically more vulnerable than men. But there was nothing sexual in it. There was nothing that was aimed specifically at them as women, except that they were vulnerable, and maybe would not have been as successful if those had been two young male missionaries. But the conceit still might have worked, if they had been men. As I said, when you think about violence against women, you mostly think of gender violence having to do with sexuality. And there was none of that in this.
Sean, what's your take?
There are three major characters in this movie, and spoiler, there's violence done to each of them at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the church spokespeople have, they have their point, and that if you're not into this kind of movie, then you shouldn't go. Very simple. And that serves as good a warning as anything I as a film critic would write. It's like, if you're not into this stuff, stay home. Mm-hmm. And they in their statement, they also talked about how they would prefer movies that are that deal with religion, deal with faith in ways that are uplifting, that in ways that speak well. And frankly, this week there is a movie just like that for that audience if they want. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever is coming out in theaters, and that is very much a Christian-based story and told very much, talking about Jesus and the nativity and so on. And it's very uplifting. It's very sweet. It's very PG. And if that's the kind of movie you want to see, then it's there for you. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean there aren't other types of stories.
Not all art, not all filmmakers have a goal to uplift anybody necessarily. Right. That may not be their goal. Okay, let's delve into the religion aspects, Peggy.
Yes.
How does Hugh Grant's character challenge the missionaries over their belief in, for instance, Joseph Smith and Mormonism? What does he bring up?
Oh, of course, number one thing, polygamy. And I have talked to missionaries, returned missionaries, who say, oh, absolutely, we got the questions about polygamy in Europe or wherever. That's really standard criticism. He challenges them on the scriptures, the Book of Mormon. Turns out he has done a lot of investigating, and he does have a copy of the Book of Mormon with little
tabs
on it.
Very well indexed.
Yeah, so he knows what he's talking about, and he alleges that Joseph Smith, church founder Joseph Smith, had affairs, which he covered up with polygamy. Even mentions a woman named Fanny Alger, which is a very obscure, like most LDS missionaries would not have necessarily heard of her. And talks about, church leaders and control and that sort of thing. Those are, he moves from there to a general criticism of all religions, primarily Christianity, as being derivative, not original, and, just goes through this whole litany of problems with Christianity. So
I found it interesting, though, that a couple of big things weren't mentioned that I thought would be.
They didn't talk about blacks in the priesthood.
Did not talk about
the priesthood temple ban. And frankly, what's in the headlines now, the church's immense wealth.
Nope, did not talk about that.
Sean, what do you think?
No, I think the fact that they didn't talk about blacks in the priesthood, which of course, is one of the funniest lines in the Book of Mormon musical. And an open target for criticism, and they let it pass, which I found interesting. It's like, you have, if you're going to be criticizing the church, there's plenty of things about any religion you can criticize. As a former Catholic, as somebody who was raised Catholic, I know what can be brought up about the Catholics. But they left a few targets on the ground.
Yeah. So, Sean, does the movie quote work in its back and forth among the characters about religion and the quote truthfulness or falsity of religion?
I think when you take into account that the person who is making the most criticism and the most taking the most shots at religion is a character who is fairly well established by well into the film as being somebody who's insane, is a psychopath
and does not have good intentions,
and definitely has bad intentions. I think when you set it up when it is set up that way, where you have this one very insistent, very much with an agenda, and that the fact that these two young women, once they sort of key into that, once they realize that this is not just a normal call, this is not a normal visit with somebody who's investigating the church. Once they figured that out, it does become I mean, the publicity for it says, a cat and mouse thriller. Sometimes you're not so sure which one's the cat and which one's the mouse. That they give as good as they get in the discussion, in the back and forth. And that is one of the things that adds to the tension. There's a point where one of the Barnes says to Paxton, "Don't give in. Don't give him any credit for any points. Challenge everything that he says." In
an attempt to try to escape because they're being held.
In an attempt to get out because they're being held captive. But also that the way to get out is not to acquiesce, not to give in to what he's doing, because that they realize really quickly that is a trap in itself.
So
I also thought that, he's giving all these anti-religion statements, pretty overwhelming. But then, I think it was Sister Barnes who's like, well, that's completely shallow and not nuanced. And I mean, she has comebacks. They don't give as much space or time to their comebacks. But at first you think these sisters are just naive and they're just going to be bowled over.
Especially one.
Bowled over by this. And then at that point, I feel like the movie turned a little bit. And you did think, oh, these young women are smarter than you think. Even in debating, they're smarter than you think. She
unloads pretty heavily on him and effectively on him. And he even seems a little bit the Hugh Grant character. Okay. This person has something going for him. I also noticed that it was interesting when the Book of Mormon was put on the table and they see the tabs. That seems like that's a clue to the missionaries. This is going to be a little different than what we encountered. And I think they show that pretty effectively.
Yeah, they're pretty sharp. They don't stick to the script of the first discussion and whatever else that you get into that you're taught as a missionary. They do adjust. They do they size up what he is saying and try to react to it. And once they realize things are definitely going south, they not just react to it, but they realize that like I said, that challenging him is the way that they're going to be able to survive.
And they both show their growth and their smarts, both the missionaries. So let me just ask you point blank. If you're asked, is this movie anti-Mormon or anti-religion, what would you answer? Peggy, do you want to start?
Well, I would say yes. It's an attempt to put down Mormonism, put down religion in general, especially in all the arguments given by Hugh Grant, who it was just his charming best in a terrifyingly smooth way at the beginning, especially. But again, by the end of the film, as Sean has said, you're not rooting for that guy and his view of religion. You're rooting for those sister missionaries, and they show surprising strength. And he says he's got the two doors, belief and disbelief. And at the end, you want to say, okay, faith didn't necessarily save them, but their actions did somewhat. And so it's a mixed message. Is it straight out anti-Mormonism, anti-religion? Partly and partly not.
Sean, how would you answer that?
I don't think so. I think that, first off, I think, yes, their actions saved them, but I think their actions are rooted in their faith, and rooted in their belief that their belief that they can make their way out of this.
Right.
And their belief that when Barnes says to Paxton, challenge him, don't acquiesce, that is saying, that belief over disbelief, and that
that's a good point. So it gave them a confidence
that it allowed. Yeah. You can say their faith saved them in the sense that their faith gave them the strength and the courage to act when they needed to in the storyline.
That's a good point, John.
But like I said, I mean, you're not rooting for Hugh Grant to win here.
Yeah.
You're rooting for these two young sister missionaries to survive, to prevail. And I think if a movie that was trying to be deliberately anti-LDS would not set up in that way.
Yeah,
it's true. And also a point about control is made at the end. The religions really are about control. But the irony is ultimately he couldn't control what happened. And so that's an interesting point that there, again, if you want to go all philosophical, the idea of freedom, free agency versus determinate
compulsion or something.
You know, I mean, at the end, the sister missionaries did have a choice and were able to act on that.
If I'm going to go back to the violence just a little bit for this question, because I think we need to cover this. If I were a Mormon parent or grandparent and I saw this movie, I might have increased worries about the safety of my daughter or granddaughter on a mission. So Peggy, what does the church do to address safety for missionaries, women and men?
Well, first of all, I will say, I'm not going to be recommending this movie to anybody who has a missionary out there right now. Only people who've already gone and come back, or it could be triggering, in fact, for some of those, as we've written. The church is aware of dangers and has tried to do things, starting with, you always have to be in a twosome, never go anywhere alone. And at the beginning of the film, they say we can't come in unless your wife is there. So you're not supposed to go in homes where there's...
For sister missionaries.
They stayed a little too long. They should have figured out earlier that no wife was coming.
Although eager missionaries have someone listen and say the wife's just in the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't challenge him on that.
And you smell the blueberry pie and you think everything is fine. And by the time
they figured it out,
it was too late and that the trap had been sprung.
But those things are done.
There are rules about this. And even I thought probably one of the weakest, but actually funniest moments was that stake missionary who goes to find them and you want to say, go a little deeper there, dude. But
haven't seen Topher Grace in a movie in a little while. That was nice.
Was that the actor?
Yeah,
I would think
from that 70s show.
They have done, training there, and
these
in fact,
videos and safety zone videos.
One of the items in the safety video is to be alert to your surroundings and to be aware of who and what you're talking, who you're talking to.
They do hesitate a little bit, though. So they are thinking about those things.
So those are some of the rules. And the church points out, I think fairly, that the incidence of violence against missionaries is actually, or danger to missionaries is actually smaller than the same cohort who stays home.
Yeah, we've actually studied that.
Because the people who stay home often are in car accidents, or they might, there's just all kinds of other dangers for people who don't go to foreign places.
It's because of the young age group, of the ages that they are. That's generally a high risk category for accidents and things like that. And missionaries, if they're following the rules, aren't going to be doing some of those high risk things.
That being said, though, I mean, they cannot. These are vulnerable young people, men and women in foreign places, foreign by the sense, even in the U.S. I'm just saying places that are not their home. And there's a lot of potential danger. The church can minimize that danger, but it's never going to go away. They're vulnerable to, they're speaking to strangers, whether in people's houses or at the church. There have been incidents like in Mexico where armed gunmen went into a church setting and
they took a whole group for a while.
So there's not necessarily safety in numbers, though more than not. I mean, they're just...
sometimes they're in unstable regime things that happen.
Political things. We've written about that. They have to escape quickly if there's a coup or something. Anyway.
Yeah. Sean, do you have any take on that?
Not so much. I mean, just on the general rule that members of the faith usually don't go to R-rated movies anyway. And this is one of those. I think for some people will be enough to say, I'm out. I'm not going.
Where's that best Christmas pageant ever playing again? Yeah, right. Kind of thing.
Everywhere. all the same theaters and probably more so. You go take grandpa to grandma to that movie and you'll be fine. But I think that it's for people that are, and the things for people who are like major horror fans, they may be slightly disappointed that it's not as much of a bloody mess as what they.
It's
go
very
for.
Talky.
Yeah, it's very,
in some ways.
There's a lot of it's very dialogue driven.
Yeah,
it's definitely not a quiet place.
Right. There's people speaking. But there's people, there's people who will go see like Terrifier movies or whatever, where it's just buckets of blood, and this is not that. And so I think there's going to be a sort of interesting thing to see what happens when the movie comes out in theaters everywhere on Friday on the 8th, whether the audience is going to gravitate toward it or not, because it is a little bit different than the average horror thriller. And if your interest is in the Latter-day Saints, it's not quite that either. So
will it be off-putting to people who don't care anything about religion? They don't want to know any more about Mormonism than they already do. Like, is it too specific?
I think what people will be interested in is watching the back and forth between the two women and the Hugh Grant character, and seeing the tension that builds up as they go back and forth. And especially as you get to see what Mr. Reed, what the Grant character is really up to, and I mean, frankly, in the sort of middle portion of his spiel, when that references Monopoly and Radiohead, for comparison purposes, that's quite fascinating. And it's like, okay, that's a different way to look at this, this long time argument about religion.
So Sean, I'm going to have you put your film critic hat on completely and say, okay, so we alluded to all this, but you and I have talked about this, but rate the performance of Hugh Grant. Is this the kind of role that might garner an Oscar nomination? And then rate the performance of Chloe East and Sophie Thatcher. You've already alluded to.
Right.
But
I would say that A24, the distributor of the film, will make an effort to campaign for an Oscar nom for Hugh Grant. They probably also will make a push for a screenplay nomination. Because it's for one thing, it's an original screenplay and not an adaptation, and that sometimes it's easier to find those in more unusual genres like horror, like comedy, not just the straight dramas. I think Grant is very good in this, and in part because he's able to play against the persona that we have developed over the years, where that
works in his favor here.
It works in his favor because when we first meet him, he's this very charming, avuncular kind of dowdy, goofy guy, where he's saying, come on in, my wife's inside making pie and such. And it plays on the persona that we've seen of Hugh Grant as the sort of floppy haired, charming young man from Four Weddings and a Funeral and Notting Hill, and even as the Prime Minister in Love Actually. And so many other movies, and then turns that and subverts that. And he's sort of been on a roll in the last few years of doing more villainous roles, even in the second Paddington movie. In Paddington 2, where he's the bad guy. I mean, of course, Paddington 2 is a perfect movie, so there's nothing to be done there. But he plays this vain actor turned bad guy in that movie. And here he turns that charm into sort of a snake's smile.
But you're right. I'll never watch Notting Hill the same way again. I'm going to tell Julia Roberts, don't go in that blue door. So you don't know what awaits you over there.
It's actually more scary that he does that. I mean, as they're like slowly sucked into this web. Right. At first you're like, he's so charming.
He's so charming and non-threatening
and deferential and the whole.
He's he's
you don't realize he's threatening. You don't realize he's threatening until it's too late to get out.
Oh no, now he's a snake.
And I thought, okay, so I have seen Sophie Thatcher in a couple of horror movies like The Boogeyman and other stuff, and I haven't watched Yellow Jackets, but I've heard she's very good in it. Chloe East is a fairly new, thing for me. I saw her in The Fabelmans, and her brief role was she was really good. They're both really sharp young actors, and since they both bring different aspects to their characters, and the idea that Barnes is the more senior of the two companions, and that Paxton is definitely fresh off the boat kind, and that dynamic carries on for a little while, but then it kind of flips when Paxton, comes into her own in the confrontation. I think they're both really good. I think they're both are gonna, they're gonna have more to do. They're only like 23, 24 years old. There's plenty for them to be doing in the future.
This can only bolster their resume. So Sean, let me just ask you, would you recommend it, and how many stars would you give it?
For people that I'm always careful to recommend to the people who I think would be, amenable for that kind of movie. Obviously, if you're not a horror person, if you are sensitive about the topics we've been talking about here, this is not your movie. But generally, I would give it 3.5 stars. I think it's a really well done movie. I think the filmmakers are really good at building that suspense and building it through dialogue, which is not easy. You got to go back to movies like, Failsafe or things like Face in the Crowd. Well, Psycho is some dialogue driven, but it's also sort of visually as well.
Yes.
But it's, but the fact that so much of the tension is built up through the dialogue, through the conversation, through the confrontation, is a tough thing to pull off, and they do it really well. So I think if you're looking for a thriller that is challenging you, not just in jump scares and not just in, can you tolerate this much, scariness, but also, want to have a conversation and want to be able to, take your movie going companion out after to talk over and talk about the movie. This is definitely worth doing.
So Peggy, you've sort of alluded to this, but would you recommend this to Latter-day Saints? Why or why not?
Well, I have the same answer as Sean in the way that if you're not a person who likes horror, and if you don't like violence at all, then this is not the movie for you. But it bowing to Sean, it's probably not as bloody as a lot of stuff that I've never seen and unwilling to see.
And that's fine.
And that's fine. So I would definitely not encourage Latter-day Saints who have children on missions to go to it, because would be too scary.
It could be. Yeah.
It could be kind of triggering.
It'd be kind of triggering. And for some people who had sort of scary, dangerous things on their missions, a lot of women, we wrote about this just with the trailer, women who had dangerous things happen to them on their missions were triggered just by the trailer. And on the other hand, I think it could be a good talker for some church members. Just as a religion reporter, I went away thinking, well, what would I say to him defending religion? What would I answer? Not to a psychopath, but to an argument. And that's actually what I walked away thinking, like, oh, that's an interesting argument. So as Sean says, I guess I would recommend it to Latter-day Saints who are thinkers about their faith. I'm sure there'll be some anti or former members who think it's anti and are going to see that, but they're going to be a little disappointed, honestly, because in the same way as some of them might have been disappointed with Book of Mormon musical, it wasn't mean enough for them. And this one, those sister missionaries come off, I think, pretty well, actually, after all is said and done. So I don't give stars, but I would say there's a slice of the Latter-day Saint population that would get something out of it.
The thing about every movie is you get out what you bring in with you. Yeah. And so if you are bound to want to hate it because you don't like Latter-day Saints, or you're going to love it because you think they're going to finally get theirs, you're going to be disappointed. If on the and if from the other angle you're a very strong, proud Latter-day Saint, and you think this movie is going to be bad for the faith, or bad say bad things about the faith, you're going to probably read that into it as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
a good point.
Yeah. Well, Sean Means, Peggy Fletcher Stack, thanks for your insights.
Always a pleasure.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Come back again, Sean. Thanks as well to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind you that you can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.